and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation jointly declared East Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Palestine. Things are getting ever more complicated in the Middle East. The WTO conference concluded in Buenos Aires with no major agreements. What is likely to be the fate of this multilateral trade body? U.S. President Donald Trump made the announcement to formally recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel on December the 6th, which sparked fierce criticism from around the world. A week after Trump's announcement, an emergency summit was called within the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to confront the move.
Ministers and officials of over 50 Muslim countries gathered in Istanbul for an emergency OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, meeting called by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Erdogan had been extremely vocal on the U.S. move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and stated the U.S. had become a partner in Israel's bloodshed.
Of occupation, blockade, illegal settlements, destruction of houses, displacement, seizing land and property, disproportional violence and murder was rewarded for all the terror acts it committed with this decision.
OIC leaders stated the U.S. move signaled that it had withdrawn itself as a sponsor of peace in the Middle East. The Palestinian leader said the U.S. move was a breach.
U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the decision in order to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem is a clear breach of international law and signed agreements.
The OIC has called for international support regarding their declaration and have already received some backing in the past few days. French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Foreign Minister have appealed to the U.S. not to make the move, while U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the move could take at least 3 years, if not longer.
And for more discussion about this, we are joined by a very strong panel. First of all, in Beijing, we have Li Guofu, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Joining us in Tel Aviv is Mar Jabdanfar, who is the lecturer and analyst on the Middle East. In Tehran, we invited Hamed Musawi, a professor of political science at the University of Tehran. In Washington, D.C., we have Jonah Blank, who's a senior political scientist from RAND Corporation. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. I want to start by asking from the Middle East, in fact, from Tehran. Professor Musawi, what do you make, while you're adjusting your earpiece, what do you make? I was told by my producer that it doesn't work for now, the line. Let's go to some of the other panelists.
Sorry, what was the question again, if you could repeat?
Mr. Li, let me go to you. We see a lot of different developments. One is about the Islamic countries gathering together, declaring so-called East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestinian state. The other thing is the U.S. Congress has, in a way, kicked the ball back to the White House, to its White House court, about what to do with the Iranian nuclear deal. Thirdly, we have seen some of the other players very active about what is likely to be the major theme of the Middle East for the future. What do you make of all of these things going on at the same time? What does it say?
I think, since the Arab Spring, and we can see there is instability in the Middle East. And also, I think since Trump became the U.S. president, because of his policies, and we can see, the Middle East is more turmoil, more unstable than ever before. There are many of these very complicated issues.
Right. Well, one of those issues, of course, is about what to do with the Iranian nuclear deal. Professor Musawi, United Nations Secretary General, has been talking about investigation against Iran, whether it is involved in missile deals with the Yemen Houthis. So what exactly is going on from Iranian perspective?
Okay, first of all, let me make it very clear that that is a very different issue from the nuclear agreement. So the nuclear agreement is an agreement on its own, and it doesn't involve other issues. And it's a deal that it's already been concluded 2 years ago, so that will not be renegotiated. On the issue of the Houthi rebels, Iran has declared that it has not helped them militarily. At the same time, Iran is emphasizing that the blockade should end, because the blockade is not only hurting the Houthis but also the general public civilians, and you know that a lot of people are dying out of hunger and famine. So that's Iran's position on that.
All right, let's go to Mr. Blank in the United States. Now the Congress kicked the ball to the court of the White House what to do with the nuclear deal with Iran. Many who have been involved in that deal are against Trump's announcement earlier of talking about putting on more sanctions against Iran at this point. What do you think is the next step forward? Mid-January, as they say, the Trump administration has to come up with some kind of answer.
Yes. Everyone who looks at Iran in Washington comes to it from a position, as Dr. Moussaoui has noted, the nuclear deal is separate from other issues. And in my judgment, and those of many others in Washington, Iran has been keeping to the terms of the nuclear deal. Therefore, it would be very difficult for Congress, if it were acting responsibly, to sever the deal or to just walk away from it.
I see. At the same time, Mr. Jeff Dunbar, the U.S. is involved about the dispute between the Palestinians and the Israelis about Jerusalem. Trump administration made clear it wants Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. How much do you think this issue between Israel and the Palestinians is likely still to be the common ground of the Arab world?
Well, you know, that's a great question. I think it is an important question in the Muslim world and in the Arab world for sure. But it has been compared to, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago, it has been increasingly sidelined by other events in the region, such as the invasion of Iraq by the U.S. and the civil war we saw in Iraq, which was raging there for many years, and then by the Arab Spring, and then by the great war that has been going on in Syria, which has led to the highest number of deaths in this region, highest number of civilians being killed by their own leader, which is the case of President Assad. And of course in Yemen, the war between Yemen, the Houthis and the Saudis, and as my colleague in Tehran quite rightly said, the siege there, the Saudi concerns there, the Houthi concerns there. So in a way, you know, there are so many other things that are occupying the airwaves of Arab press that today, although the Palestinian issue is important, it doesn't have the same central position that it has before. And also another reason for that is intra-Palestinian differences, the differences between Fatah and Hamas, the PLO and Hamas. That's another reason why.
Right. So having said all of these, we got a lot of things going on, all at the same time, at different layers. Professor Moussaoui from Iran, what do you think, to you, the Iranians, is the central theme that you would focus on when it comes to the most important thing for the Middle East of the future? Is it going to be the relations between the Iranians and the Saudi and the United States, Israel? Or is it going to be the Israeli-Palestinian? Or is it going to be something else? Professor Moussaoui.
It's true that in the past 10 years there has been other events that have somewhat sidelined the Palestinian issue. But at the same time, a lot of these other events, such as the Syrian war, the Iraqi invasion, are winding down, and also ISIS has largely been defeated. So I do think the Israeli-Palestinian issue will become more important as we go on. And I should point out that moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is a pretty significant event by the Americans, in the sense that even though the two-state solution has literally died in the past few years, nevertheless, the moving of the embassy is a clear indication that even the Americans believe that the two-state solution has died. And I think the main issue today is that the world community has to advocate for one person, one vote, essentially for the Palestinians in the occupied territories to be given citizenship rights and to be allowed to vote. Otherwise, it would be an apartheid system.
But my question to you, Mr. Lee, is the same as I put forward to Professor Moussaoui. What is the major theme we're talking about here? Usually, the Israeli-Palestinian issue could be a crystallization of the contest for leadership and also the contest about different factions about the Arab world in the Middle East. Is it still that issue? Or the issue has become Iranians vis-a-vis the Saudis?
I think that this is a very important issues. And the Palestinian issue used to be regarded as the key or the most important issues between the Israeli and the Palestinians or the Arab countries. And since I think the American invasion of Iraq, there are several kind of very important events which has been put the Palestinian issue aside the line. But still, this is remain as one of the key issues in the Middle East. Currently, and many people would think that the rivalry between Iran and the Saudi could be the most important issues in the region. And some of the outside countries, like the U.S., try to manipulate this kind of perceptions and put forward these new decisions. But I believe, because the Palestinian issue is very emotional.
All right, it is. And it is always the crystallization of some of the conflicts among countries, the Israeli and Palestinian issue. Let me go to you, Mr. Blank. As a result, we see quite interesting phenomenon. Saudis used to be claimed as the guardians of the Jerusalem, or as of these Palestinians. But now you see the Iranians are calling on the Arab world to do more for the Palestinian state. And also, they even designate a one day of the year to be exactly for that cause. So when the Saudis are not necessarily voicing very strong opposition, will the contest for leadership of the Middle East becoming ever more fearful reflected by, this Palestinian and the Israeli issue?
I think you've put your finger on a very important point. A lot of what is happening in the Middle East is a series of proxy contests between Saudi Arabia and Iran over leadership, both of the Middle East and of the greater Muslim world. And this is not particularly new. At least since the Iranian Revolution, Iran has staked out a claim for such leadership. The real question from a Washington perspective is, will there be any unified American strategy towards the Middle East?
Will there be?
Because right now, there's an Iran strategy. I don't really see a unified strategy in this administration.
Not at all. Let me go to
I see an Iran strategy to some extent, and others that are really disconnected from each other.
And what would that mean for the region, you think, Mr. Blank, when it is disconnected? Will different countries get different signals or indicate that they have got different signals coming from Washington, therefore could support whatever they want to do in the region?
I think that's already happening. I think this decision about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, for example, sends tremendously mixed signals to the region. Because on the one hand, the president is changing long-standing U.S. policy in a very destabilizing way, but on the other, the Secretary of State is saying nothing really is going to happen until the next administration at the earliest. And for people in the region, they have to be wondering what is the U.S. position and how will it really affect things on the ground.
Mr. Jabdanfar from Israel, as a result of this confusion and signals coming from all sides, will Israel really benefit from this chaos? Or it would fall actually as a victim because chaos is likely to be spinning out of control. There is a context of leadership in the Middle East, and there's further constraints of possibility for peace. Mr. Jabdanfar, has Israel thought about the potential?
I think that there's definitely concern, but please allow me to make one important clarification.
Go ahead, sir.
First of all, I think the announcement by President Trump, it has made the situation more unstable in some ways, but there is no guarantee that the United States is going to move its embassy to East Jerusalem, number one. And number two, President Trump says that this announcement does not mean that the boundaries of Israeli sovereignty, I'm looking at the text here from the White House, that the boundaries of the sovereignty of Jerusalem is over. No, there's still the issue of East Jerusalem that could very well become the future of a Palestinian state. But in terms of instability in the region, look, you know, we are part of the Middle East. We share borders with Syria, which is going through one of the bloodiest civil wars. We have there's ISIS in the region. We have ISIS on our southern border in the Sinai. We have, the problem of terrorism we have faced for many years. Of course, instability in the region is not good for us, but in terms of what's the best way to address it, the left wing in Israel believes that the best way to address this is to try to reach a comprehensive deal with the Arab world, headed by the Saudis, because the Saudis are heading the peace initiative in this region. However, the right wing in Israel believe that we've tried to reach peace before, but we didn't get anywhere, so we just have to try to do the best we can while improving relations with European and countries and America.
At this point, there's so much confusion. So let's concentrate on some of the things that people have been talking about. There are talks of a deal that the U.S. is pursuing. Whether that is true or not, it is up for debate. One of those Palestinian parliamentarians has been explaining. His name is Ahmed Tibi. He's been talking about the basic contours of the deal. They are talking about no full statehood for Palestinians and also control over disconnected areas of occupied territories. There will be no capital in East Jerusalem and no right of return for the Palestinian refugees. These, of course, are some of the things put on the table at this point. Nobody is saying this is actually going to be the deal. But having said that, though, Mr. Lee, while these ideas are flying around, fundamentally, what are we talking about?
I think, this is something very interesting. And I think, President Trump may learn something that, the previous way or methods, it will be very difficult for both sides to strike a deal. So he may, come out with a new way, his own way, try to impose a deal on both sides instead of let both sides through the negotiations to reach a deal.
So, gentlemen, earlier we have different issues being touched on. There are several layers of things. One is the Israel-Palestinian issue, which has been there for decades. The contest of leadership between the Iranians and also the Saudis, which has been there for probably even longer time. And now coming even more obvious. Thirdly, there is the dramatic change going on in the Middle East as a result of recent wars and as a result of big power plays in the region. All of these different layers happening at the same time. Professor Moussaoui, out of this chaos, from your perspective in Iran, who is going to be the biggest beneficiary of this?
I think in some ways actually Israel does benefit from the chaos because, as was pointed out by another guest, actually the chaos in other countries has sidelined the Palestinian issue. I'll give you an example. In 1993, when the Oslo negotiations started, there was about 100,000 illegal settlers in the occupied territories. Today, there is over 500,000. So as these other chaos has been going on throughout the Middle East, the Israelis have been building more settlements in the occupied territory. So it has served them in a way. But I think at the same time, with the decline of the power and involvement of the United States in the Middle East, there will be greater room for other powers such as Russia, as well as even for China in the future to become more involved in the Middle East. Nevertheless, I think we should still wait and see what happens.
I see. Mr. Jeff Dunbar, from the Israeli perspective, who is going to be the biggest benefiter of chaos right now?
I think extremist movements. The state of Israel withdrew from Gaza, took out 8,000 of its citizens as a gesture of peace, and what we got in return were more rockets from Hamas. So this is a concern for us. The more chaos, because of the chaos in Gaza, the more chaos you have, the more you have extremist movements. Or when we did withdraw as part of the Oslo peace plan from major Palestinian cities, the highest number of Israelis in the history of Israel were killed after each peace initiative by Israel, 1993 and in 2000. So every time Israel withdrew, there was chaos, and we saw unprecedented wave of bus bombings in Israel, killing civilians, and suicide bombings, killing in cafes. And so I think it's something that only extremist movement in this region thrive from when there is chaos.
Mr. Lee, your assessment?
I think that it's really maybe, to gain the most benefits from, all these chaos. And in the, maybe previous or past several years, it will be very hard to think that, there is some cooperation between Israel and the Saudis.
All right. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Blank, the biggest benefactor, and what would that mean for the region? U.S.?
No, I think the U.S. will definitely be among the least benefited by chaos. The U.S. is a status quo power, and chaos is ultimately against the interests of anyone who favors the status quo. I think in the short term, Israel may benefit from some of the distraction from the Palestinian cause. In the medium term, perhaps Iran will have some opportunities to expand its influence. But in the long term, extremist groups will certainly benefit, and any other groups that try to destroy the status quo will be the ultimate beneficiaries of chaos.
Despite all the differences in our previous opinions, it seems, gentlemen, we are agreeing with one another. Chaos is not bringing us any hope for peace. But for now, I really want to thank the four of you for sharing your perspectives and your insights. The Guofu, Jeff Dunbar, Mahmoud Musawi, and Jonah Blank. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us.